"Shut up, Mom. Just shut up. You don't know anything about my life." The words exploded from my son's mouth like venom, each syllable designed to wound, and they hit their target perfectly. My heart, standing right there in the middle of my own kitchen where I just finished cooking Thanksgiving dinner for 12 people. My hands were still covered in flour from the pies I'd baked at 5 in the morning, and there stood my David, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, with his face red with rage, his expensive suit jacket thrown over my chair, telling me to shut up in front of his wife Jennifer, their 3 children, and Jennifer's parents who were visiting from California. The room went absolutely silent except for the sound of my granddaughter Emma starting to cry, and I watched my daughter-in-law reach for David's arm and whisper, "David, please not now." But he shook her off and pointed at me like I'd committed some terrible crime. I'd only said one thing, just one simple suggestion, that maybe they should reconsider buying that second vacation home in the mountains when David had mentioned earlier they were worried about money. That's all it took. One gentle observation, one motherly concern, and he exploded like I'd attacked everything he'd built for himself. But what made that moment so devastating wasn't just the harsh words. It was what Jennifer had whispered to me an hour earlier in the hallway, while David was outside showing off his new grill. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something," she'd said, her face tight with stress. "David told me you've been helping with some bills, but he won't tell me which ones or how much. We got another notice from the bank last week, and when I asked him, he just said you'd taken care of it. What's going on?" I'd frozen in that hallway, my stomach dropping, because I'd specifically asked David 6 years ago not to tell anyone about our arrangement. But apparently my son had been using my help as some kind of shield, some excuse whenever money problems came up, without ever admitting the full truth to his own wife. "My name is Dorothy, I'm 64 years old, and I need to tell you how I discovered that the person I'd sacrificed everything for had been lying to me for years, and the moment I decided that enough was finally enough. Let me help you understand how deep this betrayal cut. My husband Robert died 20 years ago in a car accident, leaving me with a 14-year-old son and a mountain of debt. I worked as a teacher during the day and cleaned offices at night, sometimes sleeping only 3 or 4 hours. I ate rice and beans while David had proper meals. I wore the same coat for 10 winters while making sure he had the right clothes so he wouldn't be teased at school. When he got into college, I took out loans I'm still paying off today. They come out of my Social Security check every single month. 7 years ago, David came to me in tears. He'd taken out a business loan to start his own consulting firm against my advice, and when the business failed after 18 months, he was left with $80,000 in debt and destroyed credit. He sat at my kitchen table and begged me to help him. I paid off his entire business debt using the inheritance from my mother. Money I'd planned to use to finally buy my own house instead of renting this apartment I'd lived in for 15 years. $80,000 gone in one wire transfer, because he promised he'd learned his lesson and would never ask for anything again. But 2 years later he came back. He'd met Jennifer, they were getting married, and he wanted to buy a house. The bank wouldn't approve the mortgage because of his past default. They wanted a massive down payment of $75,000 plus a cosigner. I'd spent 2 years rebuilding my savings, working summer school, taking on private tutoring. I had $40,000 saved for a trip to Italy I'd been dreaming about since I was young. I gave him every penny, then took out a home equity line of credit on my sister's house to make up the remaining $35,000. $75,000 for his down payment, and he promised this was absolutely the last time. Then the monthly payments started coming due, $1,800 a month. And within 3 months David had missed 2 payments. The bank called me as the cosigner, threatening foreclosure. I panicked and set up an arrangement where I'd make the mortgage payments directly from my account, and they'd tell David they'd restructured his loan. I told myself it would be temporary, just 6 months until his work picked up. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of $1,800 leaving my account every single month. That's $129,600 I've paid toward his mortgage, on top of the $75,000 down payment. Over $200,000 total. My entire retirement savings, my Social Security checks, every substitute teaching job I could find. All funneling into a house my son thought he owned free and clear. And he never questioned it. Not once in 6 years did David wonder why the bank stopped sending payment notices, why his credit improved, why everything just magically worked out. He simply accepted it as his due. Standing there in my kitchen that Thanksgiving night, with "Shut up, Mom" still echoing in my ears, I realized what I'd done to myself. I'd enabled a man who didn't respect me, who saw my sacrifices as his birthright, who would scream at his elderly mother rather than accept even the gentlest advice. I didn't cry at the table. I didn't defend myself. I walked to my bedroom while David said loudly, "See? She always does this drama queen thing when she doesn't get her way." I closed my door on all of it. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I opened my banking app and stared at the automatic payment scheduled for December 1st, just 4 days away. But first, I logged into the mortgage company's website using the account I'd set up years ago. I looked at the payment history, saw the devastating total I'd been too afraid to calculate. Then I looked at the original loan documents. And that's when I found it. That's when everything changed. The house wasn't in David's name alone. Because I was the co-signer and had made the down payment, and because of how the bank had structured the loan after his initial defaults, the property title listed me as a 50% owner. All these years, I thought I was just helping with payments, but legally, I owned half of his dream house. He'd never mentioned this to me. Either he didn't know, or he deliberately kept it from me. I started laughing, not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when you realize you've been a fool. But it was also the laugh of someone who just discovered they had power they didn't know existed. I canceled the automatic payment. Then I sent an email to the mortgage company asking them to send all future notices to my email address as the co-owner. And then I turned off my phone because I knew what was coming. Tomorrow was December 1st. Tomorrow the payment wouldn't go through. And tomorrow my son was going to learn that you don't tell your mother to shut up when she's the only thing standing between you and losing everything. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like I mattered. I felt terrified of what I'd just done, but also more certain than I'd been of anything in years. The storm was coming, and this time I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up after it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the streetlight outside shift across the plaster, and I kept replaying those words over and over in my mind. "Shut up, Mom," like a record stuck on the worst possible note. My phone sat on the nightstand where I'd left it, powered off, and I knew that when I turned it back on, my life was going to change in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. Part of me wanted to undo what I'd done, to log back into that banking app and restore the automatic payment before anyone noticed, before the consequences became real. But a larger part of me, a part one didn't even know existed until last night, felt something I can only describe as relief, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. When the sun started filtering through my curtains around 6 in the morning, I got up and made myself coffee the way I always did, using the same chipped mug I'd had for 15 years because I never spent money on myself, never thought I deserved new things when that money could go to David instead. I sat at my small kitchen table and I thought about all the mornings I'd sat here planning my budget, figuring out how to stretch my Social Security check to cover both my rent and his mortgage payment, deciding which of my own bills I could let slide for another month. I'd gotten so good at living on almost nothing that it had become normal to me. The thermostat set at 60 degrees in winter to save on heating, buying the day-old bread from the discount rack, wearing shoes until they had holes in them. I remembered the day 3 years ago when my tooth broke while I was eating dinner, and I'd needed a crown that would cost $1,200. My dentist had told me it was urgent, that I risked infection if I waited, but that same week David had called me excited about a new car he wanted to buy, some luxury sedan that would make him look more professional to clients. I'd scheduled the dental work, but then the day before my appointment, I'd called and canceled it. I'd taken the $1,200 I'd saved up and sent it to David instead, telling him it was an early birthday present. I lived with that broken tooth for 2 years, eventually having it pulled entirely because I couldn't afford the crown. I learned to smile with my mouth closed, learned to chew on one side. That's what love looked like to me. My son in his luxury sedan, me with a gap in my smile. Around 8 in the morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It took a moment to power up, and then the notifications started flooding in. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. But they weren't from David yet. It was too early. December 1st meant the payment would be attempted sometime during business hours, probably around 9 or 10 when the bank's automated systems ran their daily processing. I had a few hours before the storm hit. I used that time to do something I hadn't done in years. I went through my own financial records, really looked at them for the first time with clear eyes. I pulled out the folder I kept in my desk drawer, the one stuffed with bank statements and bills and notices I'd been too overwhelmed to face properly. I spread everything out on my kitchen table and I started calculating. The numbers were worse than I'd even realized. After paying David's mortgage every month, I'd been living on roughly $600 for all my other expenses. Rent, utilities, food, medication, everything. I'd been in a constant state of just barely surviving, robbing Peter to pay Paul, as they say, letting my own credit cards creep up because I had no other choice. I found a stack of medical bills I'd been ignoring, notices from collection agencies for tests and procedures my Medicare hadn't covered. I found overdue notices for my car insurance, threatening cancellation. I found a letter from my landlord from 6 months ago warning that if I was late on rent one more time, I'd face eviction. I'd been one emergency away from homelessness, and I'd accepted this as normal, as the price of being a good mother. My phone buzzed around 9:30 with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the message made my heart skip. Payment declined, insufficient funds. Account number 7743. Contact immediately. I stared at those words and I realized it had begun. The mortgage company's automated system had tried to process the payment from my account, found that I'd canceled the automatic transfer, and was now sending alerts. Within minutes, they'd be contacting David. I waited. I sat there at my kitchen table with my cold coffee and my stack of bills and I waited for my phone to ring. It took 20 minutes. When David's name flashed across my screen, I felt my hand shake as I reached for the phone, but I didn't answer. I let it ring through to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. I sat there and watched my son's name appear over and over on my screen, each call lasting exactly long enough to go to voicemail, and I didn't answer a single one. After the 5th call, I listened to the voicemails. The first one was confused. "Mom, hey, I got a weird call from the mortgage company about a missed payment. Can you call me back? I think there's some mix-up with the bank." The second one was slightly more urgent. "Mom, seriously, I need to talk to you. The bank is saying the payment didn't go through, and I don't understand what's happening." The third one had an edge of panic. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering? They're saying I owe 6 months of back payments. This doesn't make any sense." 6 months of back payments. I let that sink in. The bank was telling him he owed 6 months because that's how they'd structured the forbearance all those years ago. Any missed payment would trigger all the deferred amounts becoming due immediately. But it wasn't 6 months he owed. It was 6 years. It was 72 months of payments at $1,800 each. It was $129,600 he'd never known I was paying. I turned my phone to silent and set it face down on the table. Then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I got dressed in my nicest outfit, the navy blue dress I saved for special occasions, and I went to the bank. I had documents to collect, ownership papers to understand, and a future to finally start planning for myself. The messages kept coming all day, but I didn't read them. Not yet. First, I needed to know exactly where I stood, exactly what power I had, and exactly what my son was about to lose if he couldn't learn some respect and gratitude. The old Dorothy would have rushed to fix this mess within an hour. The new Dorothy was going to let him sit with his consequences for a while, maybe for the first time in his entire life. By the time I got home from the bank that afternoon, my phone showed 37 missed calls. 37. I stood in my apartment doorway with the documents the bank had given me clutched in my hand. Official papers proving I owned 50% of David's house. Papers showing every single payment I'd made for 6 years. Papers that made everything legally clear and undeniable. And I looked at that number on my screen and felt something between satisfaction and heartbreak. My son had called me 37 times in 6 hours, and not once in the past 6 years had he called me just to see how I was doing, just to say hello, just to tell me he loved me. I sat down on my couch and I started listening to the voicemails, one after another, and I watched my son's emotional journey unfold in real time. The early messages were still confused, still assuming this was some kind of bank error that I could help him fix because mothers always fix things, don't they? "Mom, please call me back. I really need to talk to you about this mortgage thing. The bank is being crazy and I just need you to tell them there's been a mistake." His voice was irritated but not yet panicked, still carrying that entitled tone that assumed the world would bend to accommodate him. But by message 15, something had shifted. Mom, where are you? Are you okay? I'm starting to get worried. The bank is saying things that don't make sense. They're talking about a cosigner and deferred payments, and I don't understand any of it. Please call me. That was the first time I heard actual fear in his voice, the first crack in his certainty that everything would work out the way it always had. Message 23 was different entirely. Mom, I went to the bank in person. They showed me the payment history. They showed me your name on the account. Mom, what did you do? Why didn't you tell me? They're saying you've been making the payments this whole time. That's not possible. That can't be right. His voice was shaking now, and I could hear Jennifer saying something in the background, her tone sharp and angry. I wondered what she was thinking, learning that her husband's mother had been paying their mortgage for 6 years while they'd been buying boats and vacation homes and treating me like an interfering old woman whose opinions didn't matter. I skipped ahead to message 35. You did this on purpose. You canceled the payment on purpose. How could you do this to us? To your grandchildren? We're going to lose the house, Mom. The bank is threatening foreclosure. They want $130,000. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? You can't just destroy my life because I hurt your feelings. Call me back right now. There it was. The real David, the one who'd been hiding under all those tears and promises and thank yous over the years. In his mind, I destroyed his life by stopping the destruction of my own. In his mind, my feelings being hurt was a trivial thing, not worthy of consequences, certainly not worthy of disrupting his comfortable existence. And he still thought this was about hurt feelings, about a moment of rudeness, not about decades of being used and taken for granted and treated like an ATM machine that existed solely to fund his dreams. I didn't call him back. Instead, I made myself dinner, real dinner, not the instant ramen or day-old bread I'd been living on. I went to the grocery store and I bought a fresh piece of salmon, vegetables that weren't wilted, a nice bottle of wine. I spent $40 on one meal, money I would have normally sent to David without a second thought, and I cooked it slowly and carefully in my little kitchen. I set my table with the good plates I'd been saving for special occasions that never came, and I ate dinner alone while my phone continued to buzz with incoming calls. After dinner, I poured myself a second glass of wine and I finally looked at the text messages. There were over 60 of them, and they told a story even more revealing than the voicemails. The early texts were practical. Mom, call me ASAP. Mom, this is urgent. Mom, please pick up. But then they got desperate. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I was stressed. Please, let's fix this together. And then they got manipulative. The kids are crying. Emma keeps asking why Grandma is mad at Daddy. Do you want to hurt your grandchildren? And finally they got nasty. Jennifer says you're a vindictive old woman and she's right. You're supposed to help your family, not sabotage them. Dad would be ashamed of you. That last message made me set my wine glass down hard enough that it almost cracked. Dad would be ashamed of me. My Robert, who'd loved me and respected me and treated me like a partner, would be ashamed that I'd finally stopped letting our son walk all over me? I thought about what Robert would actually think if he could see what I'd done for David these past 20 years, how I'd sacrificed every dream and comfort and security to fund a grown man's lifestyle while he treated me like hired help. Robert would have stopped this years ago. Robert would have taught our son to stand on his own 2 feet, to take responsibility, to show gratitude and respect. It was only because Robert died that I'd been able to become this version of myself. The doormat mother, the endless giver, the woman who disappeared a little more each year under the weight of her son's needs. I texted back just 5 words. We'll talk when you're ready. Then I turned my phone off completely and I went to bed. Tomorrow was December 2nd. Tomorrow, David would have to start figuring out how to save his house without me. Tomorrow, he'd have to face his wife and explain why he'd hidden the truth about our arrangement. Tomorrow, he'd have to look at his expensive toys and his vacation home and his luxury car and decide which of those things mattered more than his pride. And tomorrow, I'd start the process of legally claiming my 50% ownership of his house, because I'd learned something important at the bank today. The mortgage company had offered me a deal. If I resumed payments, they'd restructure the loan in my name only, removing David as the primary borrower. I could take full ownership, or I could sell my half to David if he could somehow come up with the money. Either way, I held all the cards now. For the first time in 64 years, I had the power, and I wasn't going to give it away for nothing ever again. I fell asleep that night peacefully, even knowing the storm was far from over. Because storms eventually pass, and when this one did, I was going to still be standing, finally living for myself instead of being slowly erased by someone else's endless needs. The pounding on my door started at 7 in the morning on December 3rd. I was in my bathrobe making coffee when the banging shook my apartment so hard that my neighbor's dog started barking through the walls. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. David stood there in yesterday's clothes, his hair uncombed, his eyes red and wild, and he was hitting my door with the flat of his palm like he could break through if he just tried hard enough. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk right now." I stood on my side of that door for a long moment, my hand on the knob, feeling my heart pound in my chest. The old Dorothy would have opened it immediately, would have let him in and apologized and fixed everything before he could suffer another minute. But the new Dorothy remembered those words, "Shut up, Mom," and she remembered 64 years of making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. I turned the lock and opened the door just enough to see him, keeping the chain engaged. "We can talk when you're calm," I said quietly. "Not like this." His face went through so many emotions in that second. Shock that I hadn't immediately let him in. Rage that I was keeping him out, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Calm? You want me to be calm? Mom, they're going to foreclose on my house in 30 days. 30 days. Jennifer has left me. She took the kids to her parents' house in California. She says she can't trust me anymore because I lied about our finances. My entire life is falling apart." I felt a pang of sympathy hearing about Jennifer and the children, about my grandbabies being caught in the middle of this mess. But I also felt something harder underneath that sympathy. "Why did you lie to her, David? Why didn't you tell your wife the truth about where the money was coming from?" He stared at me through the gap in the door like I'd asked him something in a foreign language. "Because it was embarrassing. Because I'm supposed to be the provider. Because what kind of man can't even pay his own mortgage without his elderly mother doing it for him?" His voice cracked on those last words, and for a second I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd cried when his father died and promised me he'd be the man of the house now. But then I remembered all the years since then, all the ways he'd taken and never thought about what it cost me. "You could have been the kind of man who worked with his wife as a partner," I said. "You could have been honest. You could have made different choices about boats and vacation homes and luxury cars. You could have lived within your means. Don't you dare lecture me," he shouted, loud enough that I heard Mrs. Patterson's door open down the hall. "You're the one who did this. You're the one who let me think everything was fine. If you were paying the mortgage, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe I was managing on my own?" And there it was, the heart of everything. He was angry at me for helping him. He was angry at me for not helping him. He was angry at me for letting him fail, and angry at me for not letting him fail. There was no way I could have ever done the right thing in his eyes, because the problem wasn't what I'd done or hadn't done. The problem was that he'd never grown up, never learned to take responsibility, never understood that actions have consequences. "I need you to leave now," I said. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, a respectful conversation, you can call me and we'll arrange to meet somewhere. But not like this." I started to close the door, but he shoved his hand into the gap. "Wait. Mom, please. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I told you to shut up. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate everything you did. I'm sorry. Isn't that what you want to hear? Now please help me fix this. I'll lose everything." His apology sounded like every other apology he'd ever given me. Words said to get what he wanted, not because he actually understood what he'd done wrong. "David, you've already lost everything. You lost it the moment you decided your mother's sacrifices were something you were entitled to instead of something to be grateful for. The house, the life you've been living, it was never really yours. It was mine. I paid for it. And now you need to figure out how to build something that actually belongs to you." I closed the door while he was still sputtering protests and I locked it. He stayed outside for another 10 minutes, alternating between pleading and threatening, before finally leaving. I sat on my couch and shook for a while after that because standing up to him was still so hard, still felt so unnatural, but it also felt necessary in a way I couldn't fully explain. Later that afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Dorothy, this is Jennifer. Please don't hang up." I almost did hang up, but something in her tone stopped me. She sounded exhausted and sad and nothing like the polished, confident woman who'd sat at my Thanksgiving table 4 days ago. "I'm listening," I said. "I need to tell you something," Jennifer said. "Something David doesn't know I found out." After I left and took the kids to my parents' place, I went through all our financial records, every bank statement, every credit card bill, everything. "Dorothy, the mortgage payment isn't the only thing he's been lying about. There's more. So much more." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The boat he bought last year? He put it on a credit card with a $30,000 limit. It's maxed out, and he's been making minimum payments. The vacation home? He didn't tell me he took out a home equity loan against our primary house to make the down payment. A loan with a variable interest rate that just jumped to 18%. His consulting business? It's failing, Dorothy. He's lost 3 major clients in the past year and he's been hiding it from me, telling me everything's fine while he spends money we don't have to keep up appearances." I closed my eyes and felt the full weight of what I'd enabled settling onto my shoulders. By paying his mortgage all these years, I'd freed up his income to dig himself into even deeper holes. I thought I was helping him, but I'd actually been making it possible for him to destroy himself with debt and lies and illusions of success. "How much does he owe?" I asked quietly. "Besides the mortgage?" "At least $200,000 in various loans and credit cards. Maybe more. I'm still finding accounts he hid from me. Dorothy, I can't do this anymore. I can't raise my children with a man who lies about everything and takes responsibility for nothing. I'm filing for divorce." We talked for another hour, and Jennifer told me things that broke my heart. How David had been controlling their finances, hiding statements, making major purchases without consulting her. She told me she'd suspected he was getting money from somewhere because the numbers never added up, but she'd been afraid to push too hard because he'd get angry. She told me she was grateful I finally stopped enabling him, even though it meant her life was falling apart too, because at least now she could see the truth and make decisions based on reality instead of his lies. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and I cried. Not for David, but for the little boy he'd been, the good man he could have become if I'd loved him differently, if I'd taught him about consequences and responsibility instead of always catching him when he fell. I cried for Jennifer and my grandchildren, for the pain they were going through, and I cried for myself, for all the years I'd wasted trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. But underneath the tears, I felt something else growing stronger. I felt resolve. I felt clarity. And I felt ready to finish what I'd started. 3 weeks passed, and in those 3 weeks I discovered something extraordinary. I didn't actually need very much to be happy. Without the weight of David's mortgage payment draining my account every month, I had money left over at the end of each week, real money that I could spend on myself without guilt eating away at me. The first week I bought new shoes, proper ones that didn't have holes worn through the soles. The second week I went to the dentist and scheduled the dental work I'd been putting off for years. The third week I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I went to lunch with my old friend Patricia, someone I'd slowly stopped seeing because I could never afford to split the bill at restaurants and I was too ashamed to admit why. Patricia and I sat in a little cafe downtown, and when the bill came I paid for both of us without hesitation, without calculating how many days of groceries that money represented. Patricia looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Dorothy, I've missed you so much. Where have you been?" And I realized I'd been disappearing, vanishing a little more each year into the role of devoted mother, sacrificial mother, invisible mother. I'd stop being Dorothy the person and become only Dorothy the walking ATM, Dorothy the problem solver, Dorothy whose only value was what she could provide to someone else. That night I did something I'd been avoiding since everything happened. I added up all the money I'd given David over the years. Not just the mortgage payments but everything. The business loan payoff, the down payment, the car money, the birthday presents that were really bailouts, the loans I never expected him to repay. When I saw the final number written down on paper, I had to sit down because my legs went weak. $347,000. That's what I'd given my son over the course of 15 years. $347,000 that could have been my retirement, my security, my freedom. I thought about what I could have done with that money if I'd kept it for myself. I could have bought a small house outright, no mortgage, no landlord, just a place that was truly mine. I could have traveled like I'd always dreamed: Italy, Greece, Ireland, all the places Robert and I had talked about visiting someday. I could have retired early instead of still substitute teaching at 64 with my arthritis getting worse every winter. I could have lived, really lived, instead of just existing in the margins of my son's life. But here's what surprised me most. Once I let myself feel the anger about what I'd lost, once I acknowledged the enormity of what I'd sacrificed, I also felt something lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't responsible for David anymore. His choices were his own. His consequences were his own. His life was his to fix or destroy, and either way it wasn't my job to catch him when he fell. For the first time since Robert died 20 years ago, I was free. David called me twice during those 3 weeks. The first call came a week after he'd pounded on my door. His voice was different, quieter, missing that edge of entitlement. "Mom, can we meet somewhere and talk? Really talk." We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, and I listened while he told me he'd been going to therapy, that his therapist was helping him see patterns in his behavior, that he was starting to understand how much he'd taken me for granted. He didn't ask me to resume the mortgage payments. He didn't ask for money. He just said, "I'm sorry. I know I've said that before, but I'm really truly sorry. And I don't expect you to forgive me or help me. I just needed you to know that I'm trying to understand what I did wrong." I wanted to believe him. Part of me still wanted to rescue him, to fix everything, to make his pain go away. But I'd learned something important in those 3 weeks. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Love means wanting the best for someone, even when the best thing for them is to face their consequences and grow from them. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said. "And I hope you continue with the therapy. But David, I'm not going to resume the mortgage payments. I'm not going to bail you out anymore. You need to figure this out on your own." His face crumpled, but he nodded. "I know. I'm going to have to sell the house. Jennifer wants half the equity in the divorce, and I owe so much money that even if I sell it, I'll probably end up with nothing. I'll have to file for bankruptcy." He looked at me with those eyes that used to melt my heart when he was little. "Will you at least help me understand the ownership situation? The bank said you own 50%. We talked about the legal details, and I explained to him how the co-signing and the down payment and the payment history had made me a legal co-owner. I told him I'd spoken to my own lawyer. Yes, I'd actually hired a lawyer with some of the money I'd saved in those 3 weeks, and that I had options. I could force a sale of the house and take my 50% of the equity. I could buy out his half if I wanted to, or I could negotiate terms with him. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want you to sell the house," I said. "I want you to use whatever equity is left after paying off the mortgage and the home equity loan to start over, smaller and more realistic. I want you to get a modest apartment, something you can actually afford. I want you to learn to live within your means. And once you're stable, once you've proven you can manage your own finances responsibly for at least 2 years, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship on honest ground." He was crying by the end of this, and so was I, but they were different kinds of tears. His were for everything he was losing. Mine were for everything I was finally claiming back: my dignity, my future, my sense of self-worth. The second call came 2 weeks later. David had listed the house for sale and was moving into a small apartment in a less expensive part of town. Jennifer had agreed to joint custody once he was settled, but she was proceeding with the divorce. He'd cut up his credit cards and enrolled in a debt management program. "I'm doing what you said," he told me. "I'm starting over. It's hard, Mom. It's really hard. But I think maybe it's what I needed." I met my granddaughter Emma for ice cream that same week. She hugged me tight and said, "Daddy says we have to be more careful with money now, but that it's going to teach us important lessons." She was only 10 years old, but she was already wiser than her father had been at 34. Those 3 weeks taught me that it's never too late to start living for yourself. It's never too late to set boundaries, to say no, to choose your own well-being over someone else's wants. And it's never too late to discover that you're stronger than you ever knew you could be. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving night when my son told me to shut up, and I'm sitting here in my apartment on a Saturday morning with sunlight streaming through windows. I finally had the money to get properly cleaned. There's fresh coffee in my new coffee maker, not the 15-year-old one that barely worked, but a real one that I bought for myself without guilt. And I'm looking at a brochure for a Mediterranean cruise that leaves in September. Italy, Greece, Croatia. All the places I've dreamed about for 40 years. And this time I'm actually going to go. The house sold 3 months ago. After the mortgage was paid off, after the home equity loan was settled, after the real estate fees and closing costs, there was $68,000 left in equity. Half of that was legally mine, $34,000. David wanted to give me all of it, said he owed me so much more than that, but I only took my legal share. The rest was his to start rebuilding his life with, and for the first time in his entire adult life, he actually used money responsibly. He paid off his highest interest credit cards, put some in savings for his children, and kept the rest as an emergency fund. He's still working through bankruptcy, still seeing his therapist every week, still living in that modest 2-bedroom apartment that costs a third of what his mortgage used to be. We talk now, David and I, but it's different. He calls me once a week, usually on Sunday evenings, and we have real conversations, not him asking for things, not me offering to fix his problems, just two people who are related trying to understand each other. Last month he told me something that made me cry. He said, "Mom, I'm teaching Emma about money. Really teaching her. She has a savings jar and a spending jar and a giving jar, and she's learning that you can't spend what you don't have. I wish someone had taught me that when I was her age." I didn't say what we both knew, that I had tried to teach him that, but I'd undermined every lesson by always catching him when he fell, by never letting him feel the weight of his own choices. Jennifer and I have coffee once a month now. She's doing well, going back to school to finish her nursing degree, learning to stand on her own feet just like David is. She told me something important during our last coffee date. She said, "Dorothy, you did something I couldn't do. You set a boundary and you held it even when it was hard. You showed me it was possible to love someone and still say no to them. I'm trying to learn that now too. We're both learning together, I think, two women who spent too many years making ourselves smaller so the men in our lives could feel bigger. I see my grandchildren every other weekend. I take them to the park, to museums, to the library. I buy them books and art supplies instead of expensive toys, and I'm teaching them the things I wish I'd better taught their father. About gratitude, about consequences, about the difference between wants and needs. Emma told me last week that I'm her favorite person to spend time with, and when I asked her why, she said, "Because you're happy now, Grandma. You smile with your whole face." I hadn't even realized how long it had been since I'd done that. I paid off all my medical debt with the money from the house sale. I got my car insurance current. I replaced my threadbare winter coat. And then I did something extravagant. I booked that Mediterranean cruise, 16 days of waking up in different ports, of seeing places I've only read about in books. Patricia is coming with me, and we laugh like schoolgirls when we plan our itinerary, when we talk about the adventures we're finally going to have at 64 and 66 years old. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did, if I regret cutting off the mortgage payments and letting my son's life fall apart. The answer is complicated. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that I didn't teach him better when he was younger. I regret all the years I spent enabling him instead of empowering him. But I don't regret finally choosing myself. I don't regret drawing a boundary. I don't regret discovering that I matter, that my life has value beyond what I can provide to someone else. There's a quote I read somewhere recently that's been sitting with me. You can't pour from an empty cup. For 20 years I've been pouring and pouring and pouring until there was nothing left, until I was bone dry and exhausted and barely existing. I'd convinced myself that was what love looked like, that good mothers gave until they disappeared. But that wasn't love, it was fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being unneeded, fear that if I stopped giving then no one would have any reason to keep me in their lives. I know now that real love, the kind that actually helps people grow, sometimes means stepping back and letting them struggle. It means believing they're strong enough to handle their own consequences. It means respecting them enough to let them fail and learn and become who they're meant to be. I couldn't give David that gift when I was constantly rescuing him. But I've given it to him now, and as hard as this year has been for him, I can see him changing. I can see him becoming the man his father would have been proud of. As for me, I'm becoming the woman I should have been all along. I'm taking an art class at the community center on Tuesday nights. I'm volunteering at the library on Thursdays. I'm learning to play the piano, something I always wanted to do but never thought I had time for. I'm really living for the first time in decades. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in it, if you've been giving and giving and giving until there's nothing left of you, I want you to know something important. It's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself, to set boundaries, to reclaim your life. It's not selfish, it's necessary. You matter. Your dreams matter. Your well-being matters. And the people who truly love you will still be there when you stop sacrificing yourself for them. In fact, they might love you better, more honestly, once you're whole again. That cruise brochure is still sitting on my coffee table. And every time I look at it, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Excitement for my future. Hope that the best years might still be ahead of me instead of behind me. Joy that's mine alone, not borrowed from someone else's happiness. I'm Dorothy, I'm 64 years old, and I'm finally free. And if I can find my way here after all those years of being lost, then anyone can. It's never too late to come home to yourself. Never too late at all.